The recent revelations about the Trump administration's handling of federal funds have ignited a major political storm in Washington. According to a new report from the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, the Department of Government Efficiency, ironically created to streamline spending and reduce waste, is accused of having wasted nearly $21.7 billion in taxpayer money. The shocking part: this money was spent paying federal employees not to work. The findings allege that over several years, thousands of federal employees were placed on extended periods of administrative leave or other non-working statuses while still receiving full pay and benefits. This wasn't about short-term leaves for health or emergencies. In some cases, individuals reportedly spent months, even years, off the job, all funded by taxpayer dollars. The report claims that this practice was not isolated to a handful of departments but spread across multiple federal agencies, creating a systemic issue that ballooned in cost over time. When the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, was established during the Trump administration, it was marketed as a bold new initiative to ensure that every federal dollar was used wisely. Supporters claimed it would eliminate bureaucratic waste, modernize outdated systems, and make government operations leaner and more responsive. Instead, critics now say it became a prime example of the very inefficiency it was supposed to eliminate. The Senate report goes into detail, outlining how policies within DOGE allowed for employees under investigation, reassignment, or even in career limbo to remain on full pay without clear oversight or deadlines for resolution. In many cases, the reasons for employees being taken off duty were legitimate ongoing investigations into workplace conduct, security clearance reviews, or reassignment due. The report also raises questions about who exactly benefited from this system. While some employees may have been unfairly caught up in drawn-out processes through no fault of their own, others allegedly took advantage of the lack of accountability. The Senate investigation points to cases where employees on paid leave engaged in side businesses, traveled extensively, or even took other jobs while still being compensated by the federal government. In interviews, former DOGE officials defended the practice by pointing to legal and procedural constraints. They argue that federal employment protections make it difficult to terminate or reassign employees quickly, especially if there are pending legal matters, union agreements, or appeals. According to them, administrative leave is often the only viable option to remove an employee from their duties while ensuring due process is followed. But critics counter that while due process is essential, there must also be a balance to prevent abuse and waste. They argue that DOGE failed to implement effective timelines, oversight mechanisms, or incentive structures to resolve cases quickly. Instead, the system rewarded inaction, allowing cases to pile up and costs to skyrocket. The political reaction has been swift and heated. Democrats have seized on the report as evidence of mismanagement under the Trump administration, accusing it of hypocrisy for creating an agency that ultimately undermined the very goals it claimed to champion. They point to the fact that DOGE was often used as a talking point in speeches about fiscal responsibility, yet behind the scenes, it was presiding over massive waste. Republicans, on the other hand, have been divided in their response. Some have criticized the findings, calling them exaggerated or politically motivated, arguing that the problem of long-term paid leave predates the Trump administration and spans decades. Others, however, have acknowledged the seriousness of the issue and called for reforms. The report also shines a light on the challenges of reforming government bureaucracy. Efforts to modernize federal operations often run into layers of rules, regulations, and legal protections that make swift action nearly impossible. Even well-intentioned programs can be derailed by conflicting priorities, entrenched interests, and a lack of political will to make tough decisions. Beyond the political battles, the numbers themselves are staggering. Nearly $22 billion could fund countless public projects from infrastructure upgrades and education programs to healthcare initiatives and disaster relief. For many Americans struggling with a rising cost of living, the idea that such vast sums were essentially spent on nothing is infuriating. Public reaction has been intense, with social media flooded by anger, disbelief, and calls for accountability. Hashtags criticizing DOGE and the Trump administration have trended on multiple platforms, and political commentators across the spectrum have debated the implications of the findings. Some see it as a symbol of systemic government inefficiency, while others view it as a targeted political attack. At the heart of the controversy is the question of trust. Government relies on public confidence to function effectively, and every instance of waste undermines that trust. When taxpayers see their money being spent without clear benefit, it fuels cynicism and erodes support for necessary public programs. The Senate subcommittee's recommendations include stricter limits on the length of paid leave, improved tracking systems, and more authority for managers to resolve cases quickly. They also suggest that Congress pass legislation to standardize administrative leave policies across all agencies, closing loopholes that allow for indefinite paid time off without resolution. Whether these recommendations will be implemented remains to be seen. Reforms often stall in the complex web of Washington politics, especially when they require changes to long-standing labor protections or union agreements. But with the scale of waste now laid bare, there may be greater pressure than ever to act. The DOGE scandal has also reignited broader debates about the size and role of government. Supporters of a leaner federal workforce argue that the case proves the need for deep cuts and privatization in certain areas. Opponents warn that such approaches risk undermining essential services and punishing workers for the failures of management. Meanwhile, those directly affected by the scandal, the employees on paid leave, are facing increased scrutiny. While some have been cleared of wrongdoing and argue they were unfairly stigmatized, others have been found to have violated policies or engaged in misconduct. The report emphasizes that the problem lies not in the concept of paid leave itself, but in the absence of effective oversight and resolution, as the political and public fallout continues. The DOGE case is likely to remain in the headlines for weeks, if not months. Congressional hearings are expected, with current and former officials called to testify. Watchdog groups are already planning lawsuits to obtain more detailed records, and advocacy organizations are rallying for reforms to ensure such waste does not happen again. The broader lesson from this scandal is clear: without rigorous oversight, transparency, and accountability, even programs designed to increase efficiency can become vehicles for waste. And in an era where every federal dollar is fought over in budget debates, the idea of $22 billion spent without tangible benefit is bound to spark outrage. The DOGE report is not just about numbers, it's about values, priorities, and the fundamental question of how governments. The fallout from the Senate report on the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, is continuing to ripple across Washington, the media, and the general public. In the days since the report's release, the political debate has grown sharper, the calls for accountability louder, and the scope of the conversation broader, moving from just the $21.7 billion in wasted funds to larger questions about the state of federal governance itself. One of the first developments following the release of the report was the announcement of congressional hearings. Members of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations have made it clear they intend to question current and former officials from DOGE, as well as senior figures from the Trump administration who oversaw its operations. The goal, they say, is to get a clearer picture of how such waste was allowed to accumulate and why no effective measures were taken to stop it. For many lawmakers, the hearings are about more than assigning blame. They are an opportunity to showcase their own commitment to fiscal responsibility, transparency, and good governance. That's why the hearings are expected to draw significant media coverage, with both parties looking to use the moment to reinforce their political narratives. Democrats will likely frame the scandal as proof of Republican hypocrisy on spending, while some Republicans will seek to deflect by pointing to similar inefficiencies under previous administrations. The political optics are complicated by the fact that the core problem, long-term paid administrative leave, is not unique to the Trump era. Studies going back years have shown that across multiple administrations, federal employees have been kept on paid leave for extended periods due to drawn-out investigations, bureaucratic delays, and administrative inertia. What makes the DOGE case stand out is the sheer scale of the waste and the irony of it happening under an agency specifically created to combat inefficiency. Behind the political theater, watchdog organizations and public policy groups are pushing for concrete reforms. They are calling for a standardized system to track administrative leave across all federal agencies, ensuring that no one is left in limbo indefinitely. They also want clear maximum limits for how long employees can be on paid leave, with strict reporting requirements whenever those limits are exceeded. Some groups have proposed linking administrative leave timelines to specific stages of investigations. For example, once an initial review is completed, an employee could be reassigned to alternate duties rather than remaining inactive. This would allow due process to continue, while still ensuring that taxpayer dollars are funding active work. Another area under discussion is the role of unions and employee protections. Federal worker unions argue that administrative leave is sometimes the only fair option for employees under investigation, preventing premature conclusions about guilt and protecting workers from retaliation. They caution against reforms that might strip away these protections, fearing that employees could be suspended without pay for political or personal reasons. Balancing these protections with the need to avoid waste is a challenge that has stymied reformers for decades. Critics of the current system argue that it tilts too far in favor of inaction, creating perverse incentives where agencies delay decisions because there is no immediate cost to them. The cost, after all, is borne by taxpayers. Public anger over the DOGE scandal is not limited to partisan circles. Many Americans, regardless of political affiliation, are simply frustrated by the idea that their hard-earned money was spent without producing any tangible results. In a time when debates over funding for healthcare, education, infrastructure, and environmental programs are heated, the idea that $22 billion could be effectively wasted strikes a nerve. Media coverage has amplified this frustration. News outlets have shared stories of specific cases highlighted in the Senate report, such as employees who spent over a year on full pay while vacationing abroad or running personal businesses. These anecdotes have fueled outrage and led to renewed discussions about the culture of accountability, or lack thereof. In federal agencies, the Trump administration, for its part, has responded defensively to the report's findings. Some former officials have criticized the Senate investigation as politically motivated, pointing out that similar problems existed before DOGE was created. Others argue that the report cherry-picked the most extreme cases to paint an unfair picture. They emphasize that many employees on administrative leave were in sensitive positions where keeping them active during investigations could have posed security or safety risks. Despite these defenses, there is a growing consensus that changes are necessary. Even some conservative think tanks have acknowledged that the DOGE scandal undermines the credibility of arguments for smaller government if efficiency cannot be demonstrated in practice. They argue that rooting out waste is essential not only for fiscal reasons, but also for maintaining public trust in the government's ability to manage resources responsibly. There is also an international dimension to consider. Other governments and institutions around the world closely watch how the U.S. manages its federal workforce and spending. Waste on the scale described in the DOGE report can tarnish America's image as a model for effective governance, particularly when promoting good governance abroad is a key part of U.S. foreign policy. Some policy experts have suggested looking to other countries for ideas. In places like Canada and the United Kingdom, administrative leave policies are often more tightly regulated, with clear maximum durations and mandatory reviews at regular intervals. Implementing similar safeguards in the U.S. could prevent the kind of long-term stagnation revealed by the DOJ case. The Senate subcommittee's recommendations are only the first step. For real change to happen, Congress would need to pass legislation codifying these reforms into law. This would require bipartisan cooperation, something that has been in short supply in recent years. Still, the sheer scale of the waste in this case may provide enough political pressure to push some form of reform through DOT. In the meantime, advocacy groups are encouraging citizens to stay engaged. They are urging taxpayers to contact their representatives, demand transparency, and push for regular public reporting on administrative leave statistics. Public pressure, they argue, is one of the most effective tools for ensuring that the issue does not fade from the lead sides without action. The DOJ scandal is also prompting a reevaluation of the broader philosophy behind government efficiency initiatives. Critics argue that efficiency cannot simply be mandated from the top down through the creation of a new agency. Instead, it requires a cultural shift throughout the federal workforce, one that values timely decision-making, accountability, and the responsible use of public funds. Training and technology may play a role in this cultural shift. Modern case management systems, for example, could help track the status of employees on administrative leave in real time, alerting managers when cases are dragging on without resolution. Greater use of performance metrics could also incentivize faster resolutions and better resource allocation. There are also calls to expand whistleblower protections to encourage employees to report misuse of administrative leave without fear of retaliation. In some cases, the people best positioned to spot waste are those inside the system, but without strong protections, they may be reluctant to speak out as the debate over DOJ continues. The scandal has become a touchstone for larger discussions about government reform. It has exposed the tension between protecting employees' rights and ensuring taxpayer money is spent effectively. It has highlighted the difficulty of enacting reforms in a system resistant to change. And it has shown how easily good intentions can be undermined by poor execution and lack of oversight. The legacy of the DOJ scandal will depend on what happens next. If it leads to meaningful reforms and greater accountability, it could become a turning point in how the federal government manages its workforce. If not, it risks becoming just another entry in the long list of government waste stories that generate outrage but fade without resolution. For now, the story is still unfolding. Hearings will be held, reforms will be debated, and political battles will be fought. The ultimate outcome will depend on whether lawmakers can move beyond partisan point scoring to address the underlying problems that allowed $22 billion to be spent without productive return. One thing is certain: the DOJ scandal has struck a chord with the public. It has reminded Americans that efficiency is not just a buzzword, it is a responsibility owed to every taxpayer. And until that responsibility is met, stories like this will continue to erode confidence in the institutions meant to serve the people.